We are asking for a general strike to keep organized labor on the Pacific Coast. We are not only asking for it, but we're going to get it.
This land is my land, from California to the New York Island.
In the 1930s, the threat of revolution was real. In A People's History of the United States, author Howard Zinn notes that, quote, desperate people were not waiting for the government to help them, they were helping themselves. This call for fairness and accountability in America's business sector resonates loudly today in the Occupy Wall Street movement, which is based on similar demands. The Occupy movement is founded on a social consciousness and expectations that were generated during the last great economic crisis. Understanding the strikers of the 1930s can help us understand the occupiers of today. As the stock market crash caused the economy to fall, the need for strikes arose. Zinn explains that with so many people out of work and desperate for food, shelter, and other basic necessities, quote, the spirit of rebellion was growing. Nowhere was this brewing discontent more evident than in Harlan County, Kentucky. The once robust coal mining community rapidly deteriorated after 1929. By 1931, mine owners had cut the wages of miners with families to $4 or $5 per week. There was no plumbing in the camps, and disease was rampant. In Camp Carey, home to 125 families, an average of 7 children died each week. In February 1931, wages were cut yet again, and the miners rebelled. On May 5th, miners and deputies engaged in what became known as the Battle of Everts. Between 4 and 11 men were killed, and 34 miners were arrested. Governor Flem Sampson deployed the National Guard, promising medical aid, food, and the removal of armed guards from the mines, but he reneged on the deal. Malcolm Cowley's article, Kentucky Coal Town, describes an attempt by Waldo Frank, Cowley, and a group of riders to drive trucks full of food and clothing to the besieged miners. Deputies arrest the group, confiscate much of the supplies, and escort the riders back to the Kentucky state line in the middle of the night. There, deputies hit Waldo Frank and another rider over the head, leaving them bleeding on the ground. One of the 2 men screams, and the deputies retreat. Cowley credited the man who screamed with saving their lives. Through articles such as these, activists alerted the nation of the actions of owners and officials with a collective scream. It was a cry of defiance as the marginalized and mistreated working class bled in the dark. Howard Zinn argues that when Franklin Roosevelt became president, he, quote, had to meet 2 pressing needs: to reorganize capitalism to overcome the crisis and stabilize the system, and to head off the alarming growth of spontaneous rebellion. Passed on June 16, 1933, the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NIRA, guaranteed workers the right to organize and bargain collectively free of interference from employers, and stipulated a minimum wage, maximum working hours, and decent working conditions. The legislation precipitated a spat of strikes across the U.S. as unions fought the entrenched forces of labor for the recognition and rights guaranteed by the NIRA.
Efforts of business interests to forcibly open the strike-paralyzed port of San Francisco failed.
The longshoremen of the West Coast went on just such a strike in 1934. Triggered by the larger San Francisco general strike, the International Longshoremen Association led the effort, demanding higher wages, a shorter workday, and recognition by the employers. The longshoremen cooperated with warehousemen and truck drivers who refused to handle or haul freight unloaded by strikebreakers to completely shut down the port. When companies began moving freight from a pier unaffected by the strikes, rioting began on July 3rd and escalated on July 5th. On what became known as Bloody Thursday, 3 strikers were killed, 31 others were shot, and an untold number were gassed and beaten. The National Guard arrived to restore order. In the end, the longshoremen won a wage increase, union-run hiring halls, and reduced hours. This was an American working class caught in the crossfire of an ineffective government and a greedy business sector. With no help in sight, the working class used whatever means necessary to obtain relief. Not only did individuals fight for basic needs such as food and medicine, but whole communities pooled resources to provide for each other. These sentiments are alive and evident in protests all over America today. Then and now, as citizens become more desperate for relief from financial duress and unfair working conditions, they discover protests and strikes as a valuable demonstration that safety, fairness, and responsibility in America's business and financial sectors are just as important as profits.